Hello, this is Jan from JC WebTech. I create videos with tips and tricks for Elementor and web design in general. And today this video is going to be a little different. We are going to talk about tools for web design, those that I use or those that I recently tried in this hunt for the best tool possible. And I want to share this experience with you and discuss the use cases for these tools. So I am talking here about this particular flow that I'm using, that is first designing the website in Figma, which is a design tool similar to Adobe XD. And if you're not familiar with this kind of workflow, it means that you first create the design, you first plan, and this is the design of the website, but it's not, you don't care about the responsivity. You kind of like move things freely around. And you can try different things if they work, different layouts. If you want to drag something a little bit like to the left, to the right, and it's also good for communicating with clients so that you don't create a website with all the implementation of everything and they just give you feedback to change it. It's better to plan, agree on the design, and I can show you like what was the first ideas for this website. And if I had built this as a website, it would be really hard to change, but it was much easier to just start over based on their feedback and also some chat that we had about these designs. And we came up with this design. It was much more suitable for them. And this whole process was thanks to this workflow of using first the designs, much easier and much more simple and stress-free. So this is the reasoning why I do use this process. And now we are going to talk what are the tools that you can use to create a website based on these visuals and how much freedom these tools give you to achieve exactly the thing that you came up with in your design, or perhaps your designer did. You can be also handed over this kind of design and mockup and be your work to implement it. So this is what we are looking for. So I have a bunch of tools that I recently tried or had the chance to work with, and I sorted them by the lowest control to the biggest control over the layout. So I had a chance to try Wix, which is like the most famous and I think one of the biggest web builders that there are. It's not WordPress based, but I'm sure you are familiar with it. And while the experience for someone that knows how a website should be structured and how it should work was horrible, I think it's good in what it kind of does. Their main focus on templates, that they give you a template and you can very easily modify it without any knowledge whatsoever of web development. But for somebody who already has some knowledge or wants to create this kind of layouts based on some created design, I don't think it's a viable tool. So I actually moved this project over to Editor X, which belongs to Wix. It's like this newer tool that's supposed to provide bigger freedom for designers to implement their designs. And honestly, I was expecting a little bit more from that, although it gave me more freedom in terms of layout, how to create the website. You can see that this is actually the website that I was talking about before. So I first created this design and then went to implement it in Editor X. And while it was possible to do so, I think it's still like this tool is not quite there first. So for example, like you are not really able to create global styles. Like you can create global styles for text, but the only thing you can set is the font, and you cannot really set the weight. You can you can just choose if it's bold or not, which I think it's complete lack of control. You also cannot set the line height. You have like no control, and you can control it at the individual elements. And here I hide this. Here I have more control, and I can set the line spacing, which would be the line height in CSS. But this is very suboptimal to do it individually at each single element or text, and perhaps you can kind of save it, but there is no straightforward way how to do it. So also there are things that you can see that I was leveraging in the design a lot on borders, but actually editor X gives you almost zero control over borders, because it's just border around the whole element. You cannot set border just on one side, which is, I don't know, like why. It's very common CSS practice to do that. So there are these kind of things that you don't really have control about. And also you cannot put any custom CSS there, which is also a big problem. I can kind of modify it through this specific JavaScript, but it is also very specific to this platform and something to learn. And another problem I had with it is that it doesn't really follow the paradigm of websites. It's kind of trying to reinvent the way how you build website and how all this works. So while I think it works and it might be slightly easier, it's also sometimes it's annoying, because when you place some elements into the canvas, it kind of like positions it absolutely instead of relatively. It's like if I would just drag and drop something here, it would tell me that it's like 100 pixels from this side of the container, this pixels from this side of container. I would be like stuck here statically. So maybe this is easier, might be somewhat easier to learn for someone who doesn't want to dive deep into web design or web development and just wants to stay more on the side of designing tools, because this experience is a little similar to design tools. But I think the learning curve is still a little bit steep. This is not the learning curve. This is a graph that belongs to something of the company. The learning curve, I think it's a little steeper. And when you need to learn something like that, I think it would be better to invest into something like closer to the industry standards than invest into learning with this very particular tool with very particular approach to building websites. So I'll give it like 3 stars out of like 5 on the easiness and usability for my workflow. So let's move on to WordPress this time, and let's start with Gutenberg. I was actually curious where Gutenberg is. If you don't know, it is like the default kind of page builder of WordPress, and it's improving. It's coming from just being able to create like articles. Now you can actually create designs with it, especially if you use few more, like there's different plugins that make it a little bit easier, but you can create designs. So I created this design that is also based on previously developed design in Figma. And well, it is possible. It was not completely bad experience, but there are things, the biggest downside of it is that it looks, some of those things look a little different in the editor. So when you are editing, sometimes you need to preview it, find out that something looks a little bit differently, like for example here, and only then you go back, adjust it, and you're kind of hoping that you will achieve on the front end what you are expecting. So it makes the process somewhat longer and more tedious, but the advantage of this tool is obviously that it's WordPress native. So when I click here on the typical edit page, I am directly taken to the editor and there is no other third-party tools integrated with WordPress, just WordPress native. So I'm very hopeful for this tool, where it's going to get in some years. But right now I would maybe consider using it on some very simplistic layout. It's very cheap, so because you don't need to purchase anything to use it. It's free and comes with WordPress. But it's also that's not the perfect tool that I was hunting. So it was a nice experience, and Gutenberg, I guess I see you in a year or two. So now we have our trusty Elementor that I have been using heavily. As you know, this channel has been evolving around Elementor. And Elementor is great in terms of the control you have over elements. You have a lot of pre-built widgets, maybe too many, but that you can definitely create very customized layouts and designs with it. You can very easily add your custom CSS and even JavaScript, and you can modify it. That is the thing, like to some extent it's very easy to build websites, but if you sometimes when you want to achieve something very particular, it's somewhat harder. But recently Elementor actually got much better, or it's going to get better, maybe in the time that you are watching the container widget is completely rolled out, and it is improving a lot of problems that Elementor has. That first, it is the amount of code that is uses. Like it's very famous for not being very optimized. So it is a new way of building with containers rather than rows and columns, is limiting the amount of code that it outputs. So it's on the way to get better, but it's still a little bit bloated and can get the website a little bit, it's prompt to get it a little bit slower than would be optimal. And second disadvantage is that although it's easy to achieve very complex and creative layouts, if you want to achieve something very particular in your design, it can get really hard, and you need to be fighting the default way of how Elementor is creating, or the default way of the widget is presented with some custom CSS. You need to get a little creative with that, and while not being impossible usually, it can take some time. So it looks like you are progressing very fast, but then when you are almost done, you need to tweak some little thing, and it can get very time consuming there. And also you need to optimize it and use some caching plugins very heavily in order for it to be fast. So it's still not perfect. So what else is there? Then there are this like new, or especially Break Builder that we are looking at is fairly new, and I haven't built a project with it yet, but I want to try it and see, and I think it's a great tool. It seems to be doing a lot of things great. First, the code that is outputted by Brick Builder is much more optimized than Elementor. There is much less things going on, much less code, but you still have this higher level widgets that you can use, that you can drag into your canvas. So if you're coming from a tool like Elementor, I think it must be easy to pick it up. But you also have more advanced things that, for example, I think Elementor is lacking, that you can assign CSS classes to elements, and this way you make them something like variables. So I could have CSS class, for example, red, and so everything that is red, I would assign this CSS class. And if I wanted to change it, or like red and padding 20 on the bottom and 5 on the left, like more properties, because just red would be something we could use just a variable. You can do that with Elementor, but if you want to use more properties and use them on multiple elements throughout your design, if you have like strong design system within your design, you can really use it here, and you just set it once, and then you easily reuse it through this CSS classes. So I think it's very big strength of Brick Builder. So I think, but also it's a quite new tool, and Elementor is definitely winning here in terms of integrations and support of other third-party systems and plugins. So I wish they would like learn one from each other and improve in these different areas, and they would be on the verge of becoming like really the perfect tool. And now we are moving to, so far, I think my personal favorite, although I don't get to use it so often, which is Oxygen. With Oxygen, you have a lot of control over the layout, and it's the way how you construct pages is very close to the way you would code them. So you really work with the low level elements, just like div or h, like headers, divs, lists, buttons, etc. And you are really touching the elements that represent the code. So it is like a little bit lower level in terms in this way that you are really touching the code, like what you have complete control on the structure and the outputted code from this tool. So it's more than page builder, I would say. It's something like HTML editor, close to that, with fairly good UI. So everything is done here visually. So if I want to, for example, want to change background, so everything is done visually, or like spacing. So if I want to add margin 30 pixels, or what is great also is that I can use calc here. So I can like calculate based on some variables and add the combined percentage with pixels to achieve very specific layouts. So I think it gives a lot of, in terms of giving you the freedom of achieving whatever you want. It's completely the top from what we are seeing. You can also use, if this is not enough, you can easily use custom CSS in a couple of different ways, custom JavaScript. And although, so this tool has like this aura of being only for coders and programmers, but I don't think it's true. I think it's just a stereotype. You will thrive with this if you are a coder or have some experience with development, but you can also learn it without any such previous experience, and maybe you will not be able to use it to the full potential. But also it will give you a lot of freedom, and it's not so difficult to learn it. The disadvantage of Oxygen is that it takes more time on creating the basics, because what you have, for example, in Elementor already as some kind of widget already built, in Oxygen sometimes you need to think about it and build it from smaller blocks like divs and text and buttons and things like that. But although this may seem like slow you are progressing slower, you will catch up perhaps in many cases with something like Elementor on bigger projects, because you will have bigger control like over global stylings, and also you will be able to achieve much more easily very specific things that in Elementor you would kind of need to go to this like hacker mode and dig into the code to find out how you achieve this specific thing, while with Oxygen you can do it. You have full control, and you can achieve the structure that you are looking for. And So in terms of freedom, I think Oxygen is winning, but still not the perfect tool because some integrations, for example, multilingual support is not great, which kept me from not using it, on my last big project, unfortunately. So I hope that Oxygen will improve. It's going to improve with the version 4.0 significantly, and hopefully some more support from third-party plugins will come. And also, I think a very direct competitor, although being very different by being SaaS, not being WordPress, is Webflow. But I think the way of editing the website by really touching the CSS properties and HTML structure in a visual way, Webflow this makes Webflow very similar to Oxygen. So I've been also using Webflow, but what kind of keeps me using it more is, for example, compared to Oxygen, Webflow it's harder to use custom CSS. They kind of discourage you from doing it, and also it's not possible to use something like calc on functions like calc for sizing, for spacing. You cannot currently yet do it with Webflow, and if you want to do it through custom CSS, it's also kind of hard, and you don't see the custom CSS in the editor, like whatever custom CSS does. You don't see it in the editor, you will just see it on the front end. So this is like a little disadvantage, and then also some kind of integrations of services. There is quite nice ecosystem in Webflow, but it's much more paid, much more expensive, and um, there's less free alternatives to use. It's some kind of like e-commerce, and also it's much harder to manipulate it and adjust it to something specific you need. So yeah, Webflow is great platform, but I'm lacking a little bit of freedom, not in the design, but in the platform itself compared to WordPress. Like you cannot really compare Webflow as a design tool to WordPress because WordPress by default you're comparing it to Gutenberg. So I think there are two different things to compare. Like the back end of Webflow is lacking really badly compared to WordPress, like the possibilities, and even for like having another user to edit the website, you need to like pay a lot to upgrade your subscription plan, while with WordPress it's free. So this is in this way Webflow is lacking very badly behind WordPress. But on the other hand, as the tool to design, to build the design that you want, Webflow is really good. But Oxygen, I think, is doing a couple of things better. And you might be wondering why I'm not mentioning hand coding. It means like the original way of writing the code and CSS and text editor. Well, I think it is on the other side of the spectrum of these tools than Wix. Well, Wix not really being viable for like custom design. Hand coding is not direct competitor of these tools. It is suitable for very high ticket websites and projects that create so much revenue that the small or relatively small advantage of hand coding, which is the possibility of creating a highly optimized code that will allow you to shave few seconds, mostly allow you to shave few seconds of loading time, will make it worthy for the project to use like a dedicated developer to implement, and also to manage and update and support this website, because the cost of such a project will be much higher than using some of these page builders, because not only developing it but also maintaining and doing some changes is much easier, hence much cheaper with editor than hand coding it. So it really depends on the project if it is suitable. For some projects, you should definitely go with hand coding and forget about page builders. But also for some certain projects, it is way more suitable to use these kind of editors and page builders than messing around with code. So it's not better and it's not worse. It just has different target projects. So just to sum it up, we saw some tools. This is definitely not exhausting overview over because there are so many other tools, but hopefully this will point you to some direction to something you might be using or you might want to use in your project, or on the other hand save you time not wasting it on something that looks nice on a paper or in some Facebook ads, but in reality is not really viable or not just yet. So let me know in the comments if this video was useful for you, or you can also let me know which one is your favorite, or if you have some tip for some tool that I didn't mention and probably didn't try yet myself. And and I see you in the comment section or in the next video.